In one of the more surprising and shocking coaster announcements for 2025, Cedar Point is adding a tilt coaster, and it will go by the name of Siren's Curse. To most of us on the outside, this came as a shock. Now, Cedar Point is a park that gets coaster investments often and gets large coaster investments often, but a 2025 coaster investment was not something we really expected. In particular, with Top Thrill 2, the renovation by Zamperla of the Intamin accelerator coaster Top Thrill Dragster opening up this year in 2024. Granted, that ride has had a lot of problems, but it makes a bit more sense when you know the history of this new coaster coming to Cedar Point. The interesting thing is that this was never originally meant for Cedar Point. It was originally developed and purchased for and by Energylandia in Cedar, Poland. Energylandia is a huge park with tons of roller coasters. The fact that they only opened a decade ago makes it even more surprising. They seem to add a new coaster every single year. The plans for the Energylandia project ultimately fell through, and we've known for a little bit that that project was cancelled. Ultimately, it looked like this tilt coaster was going to end up at Six Flags Mexico. In fact, the track actually arrived on site. Evidently though, things fell through again. I actually think a tilt coaster would be a better addition to Mexico than it is to Cedar Point, but it's interesting because this seems to be a direct impact of the Cedar Fair Six Flags merger. If these were still two separate entities, then there is no way that it would have ended up at Cedar Point. So there is the brief history of a coaster that has traveled the world and has ultimately ended up at the roller coaster capital of the world. It's worth noting too that this could be America's first tilt coaster depending on when Circuit Breaker at Codaland in Texas actually opens. This ride was teased years ago, but it has still not opened. When Circuit Breaker was originally announced, there was no thought of another tilt coaster even being in competition, because the one that ultimately is coming to America was being developed for Europe. So if the Texas theme park still wants to claim first tilt coaster in America, they've really got to get on it. And they might want that record considering the fact that Siren's Curse is going to take a large chunk of the other records. This new coaster will be the tallest, fastest, and longest tilt coaster in North America. It'll sport 2,965 feet of track, a height of 160 feet, and a speed of 58 miles an hour, with 2 inversions and a vertical drop. One thing I also like, and we'll get to this more when we walk through the layout, is the fact that it has 13 airtime moments. This is a well-rounded coaster. It's not all about that tilt feature, and it's not all about that drop. It will have the over-the-shoulder strengths, but there still should be some really good forces on this. Now let's talk about capacity for a minute. This ride will have 2 trains. Each train has 6 cars per train. Riders are arranged 2 across in 2 rows for a total of 24 riders. The theoretical capacity isn't awful. If they dispatch a train every 90 seconds to 2 minutes, then you could have a capacity of about 720 to 1,000 riders per hour. That said, you know that A, this coaster is going to be swamped when it opens, and B, Cedar Point is already an extremely busy park. Not stacking on this coaster is going to be important. When Train 1 hits the brakes, Train 2 has got to be ready to go, if not already starting up the lift. Operations are going to be important, there's no doubt about that. And I think, especially early on, you could see some massive lines for Siren's Curse. Now let's talk about where this is located within Cedar Point, because if you're familiar with the park, you know it's on a peninsula and they are ultimately landlocked. They were able to fit this ride in between Valravn, the B&M dive coaster that opened in 2016, and Millennium Force, the Intamin Giga coaster that opened in 2000. This is across from Iron Dragon, and it's where the old Cedar Point dorms used to be located. It's pretty impressive that they found a spot to fit this ride into, and again, considering the fact that it was not designed for Cedar Point's land and Cedar Point's layout. Speaking of layout, that is a perfect segue to get into what your experience is going to be like when you take a ride on this roller coaster. Out of the station, you immediately ascend the 160-foot tall lift hill. When you reach the top, you'll take a slight turn to the left and approach the moment you've been waiting for, or probably for most guests, dreading for. You lock onto a section of track that then proceeds to tilt down, connecting you with the rest of the first drop. Even as a roller coaster enthusiast, this looks absolutely terrifying, and it is no doubt an eye-catching moment for this roller coaster. It's not clickbait, this is real. When the track locks together, you wait for just another beat before twisting down to the left and into your first drop. The whole focus of this roller coaster is the element you just experienced, the tilt track, but I think this layout looks really good. And I think it could start with that first drop. That could be an underrated moment of the ride, and in the back, I think you'll feel some nice whip as you twist to the left. After that drop, you pop up into what starts as an airtime hill, probably giving great airtime towards the front of the train, before you twist down in a very dive loop-esque motion, but you don't go upside down. You can see in comparison to the dive loop that the twist down is steep, but not quite upside down. However, you do fly upside down in just a moment when you go into your first corkscrew. This is taken at some good speed, and I think you could get some nice whip here. You then twist to the right through an off-axis hill, and that's really the first hill of a triple down. This looks like a cool section of the ride, and hopefully you pop out of your seat on a few of these hills. I also think this speaks to the development of its manufacturer, Vekoma. Old Vekoma was pretty much strictly inversions, but as they've gotten better and as they've continued to improve their models, they've started putting in more airtime moments and made their layouts a lot more fluid. The transformation Vekoma has gone through is really remarkable. After a near miss ducking under a pathway, the train goes through a non-inverting loop. This looks very fast paced, and I think in the back row, this is going to be an extremely whippy moment. I would expect a combination of airtime, laterals, and maybe even a little bit of hang time. You then twist to the right and over an airtime hill that leads you back left. From here, you whip through your second corkscrew. Again, this looks like a very fast-paced inversion. I really feel like the corkscrews on this ride could be a really underrated component. You then pop up into a small hill, into a small helix to the right, and go through 2 more hills before entering the brakes. This is an airtime focused finale, and really, it's an airtime focused layout, 13 airtime moments in total. To go back to something I said earlier, I don't know if this is the best addition to Cedar Point, but it is a really good layout, and I think it's going to be a really entertaining ride. And for a park that already has so many notable roller coasters, at this point, you need a way to stand out. Top Thrill 2 being over 400 feet tall and over 100 miles an hour definitely qualifies. A tilt track also definitely qualifies. It's certainly not going to hurt anything. The GP will absolutely eat this up, and us coaster enthusiasts are going to really appreciate what this experience can bring. And keeping the Top Thrill 2 situation in mind, having this coaster opening up next year and hopefully in a more reliable fashion could kind of get that bad taste out of Cedar Point's fans' mouths. I think that this absolutely makes a stacked park even more stacked. And so even though Cedar Point wasn't the original planned recipient for this tilt coaster, they are definitely going to profit from it. And as they say, the rich get richer. So there are some of my thoughts on the surprising and shocking new addition to Cedar Point, Siren's Curse, the tilt coaster coming in 2025. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comment section below. Does this automatically become one of the best rides at Cedar Point? Let me know your thoughts, and if you're interested in seeing more coaster videos like this, please consider subscribing. We'll see you next time.